So obviously by now you would realize that Gary has had many past lives working with sound and music and its creation, and this would be obvious from his output. And we've both been together many lifetimes as twin flames doing this work, and I'm going to share more about that in our podcast as well. But we spent time unfolding our lives together to be clear what we were to do in this lifetime. Several other lifetimes, which I'll talk about in the podcast. So just prior to our reunion in this lifetime, Gary was feeling ready to fully align with his mission work on his planet. He'd been through the 3D life and what was interesting for him and not interesting for him, and he realized that he was a light worker, a star seed. Those were the terms that were being tossed around at the time, and he definitely aligned with that, and he knew he was here in service. He knew that he was not going to be a regular 3D human, whether that be work and family and children and all of that kind of stuff, that he was here in service to assist in the current ascension process and to walk a path of conscious evolution. And many of you know that that's underway, however you term it and whatever your belief systems are of that. The process for us is a shifting from the dominant 3D carbon forms and consciousness that's attached to that into the 5D bodies of light, which is an expansive form of consciousness. And the body gradually comes along by becoming lighter and lighter and lighter until in our evolutionary process we will be able to shift easily from a dense physical 3D form into a form of light. We don't see that right now, although there's people on the planet who have been doing that, and they've laid the foundations for the process to continue. What we're here to do in this timeline was to bring through the ascension codes, the frequency codes that will access that in your DNA and start to release this information gradually, like it's a timed release kind of thing. And many of you may be on the path, and you may find yourself on and off the path and being dedicated and then going back to work on your 3D life because that needs tending, and then going back and forth. So with us coming together, we dedicated our lives to that process. So we were able to really commit to our spiritual path above all else. So with that process in 1986, Gary brought through, and this is a real-time album called Healing. And it was a challenging album to get through because going back into 86 with all of the friends that were around him at the time in prog rock and into the so-called, rock star mentality, him bringing through this kind of music for them was, he took a lot of flack, let's say, from them. He was sensitive for sure, but he was a very strong being, and he didn't succumb to peer pressure. He early on was not worried about what people thought about him, and he just moved through the energy and didn't care what they thought. But what he did need him for at that time was he did need them to record what he was doing. So with a lot of guff and grief from those around him, they did agree to do it, and the environment was not ideal. So when you listen to the Healing album, and it's quite profound, really, when you dive into it, you can kind of appreciate that even though chaos might have been going on around him in some way, shape, or form, some sort of drama, he was able to bring this album through in a real-time setting. And so for him, this first album was a calling. It was being sent out into the world, and there were things that he needed at that time in his life. Certainly one of them was me. But in addition to me, it was also to start making some connections into humanity so that he had that anchor of kind of the why he was doing it and the mission he was doing and what he needed to connect with to help those that were awakening. So it was being sent out to those who were ready to awaken. It was a calling sent out for him to find his partner, his twin flame because he knew I was here, and it was time for us to get together. And so that was the dominant reason for the healing album, but also to heal himself physically. As I said before, he wasn't always comfortable in the physical form, so this was to help him align with the physical form so that he could stay here as long as he needed to stay here to complete his work, or to lay down a good part of his body of work before he ascended onward. So the healing album was a calling being sent out to those ready to hear and to awaken to their own inner mission work. So we met in 1987 in August, which was just after the harmonic convergence. And for those of you who don't know that event, you can look it up. It was just a significant event in the awakening process of light workers and starseeds. And everybody has their own specific event that was a big opening for them. So for me, this was a big opening. I had been doing my spiritual work for a long time, not as dedicated and focused as Gary, but I had had a lot of years of the awakening process that I had gone through by the time this came around. So when the harmonic convergence event happened, my sister and I, who is also on the path, went to the harmonic convergence event together. And I had a very significant event that was felt physically, energetically. You know, it was definitely a rebirth, and a literal rebirth, because they did do some rebirthing experiences with the group. There was probably 30 or so in the group that I went to. So since I had gone through my trainings of awakening, I also had changed my career path. My initial career path was in print publishing, graphic design, typography, and moving in those directions. But by the time this time period rolled around, I was also a massage therapist. I had also gone through my training because I had discovered Rolfing, or postural integration work, early on in my 20s, which was another pivotal awakening process for me. And so it helped me to also want to change my career path. So at that time, I was pretty frustrated with the graphic arts industry. It's a very intense industry, a lot of pressures, a lot of deadlines, a lot of clients who were always crazed and frazzled and upset and this and that. So I was pretty tired of that world. Like it was a negative world. It was always intense and very stressful. And the other part of me was moving into this massage therapy world, which was the complete opposite of that. People were really grateful and appreciative. The atmosphere was very stress-free. So at that time, I had become what was called a psychophysical therapist. It's a body worker, it's a massage therapist, but I was also very interested in the transformational process. And I wanted to assist my clients to drop their density and awaken their inner light. So if you're familiar with Rolfing, it's a 10-session series, and it really helps you shift from your dense patterns or your trauma patterns or emotional patterns that are stuck in you, that keep you in a pattern of dysfunction or repeating patterns over and over again. So anyway, I took the training for that after my massage training and started my Rolfing practice after that. So along with doing that, I had opened a center and I was teaching meditation and yoga and, of course, spiritual awakening classes. And so when I met Gary, he was playing a concert at a healing arts center. And I didn't want to go out that night. I was resisting. My sister wanted to go, and I didn't want to go, but I wanted to go because it was an important healing arts center in this area. It was pretty advanced from many of the others. They were offering float tanks and a cotyledon, which was a sound bed type of situation that was connected to computers that would monitor the sound that was coming in. And it was a pretty powerful healing table. And so anyway, I decided to go. So anyway, I went into this room and Gary was playing. The room was dark. It was all candle lit. There was a lot of people laying on the floor and sitting up and watching. And so I found a seat in the back, and I just looked up at this amazing being just bringing through this music, and it was my first experience of what then was probably called a New Age concert. And I had been working with sound myself. I had been working with some music that was starting to come out in the New Age genre, but nothing like this. So after he was done playing, I went up to him, and oh my God, yeah, the butterflies, and my heart was pounding. And, I looked into his eyes, and his eyes were just deep. I mean, they were brown, so they were those dark eyes that just sucked you in. And oh my gosh, I fell in love. And so did he. I mean, he, as we talked afterwards, he was aloof in the beginning, and he was shy. He was a very shy person. He was shy until you got to know him, and then you could not shut him up. He would talk for hours and hours, just going on and on, bringing through information, keeping me up late at night all the time with his rants. But that was the beginning of our life together. It took about 8 months of us, going through and cleaning up our lives to finally be together. But once we were, that was it. And we've been together ever since then. We connected actually on Valentine's Day of the following year in '88. And that's when our life began together, and we started to discover our path, and we started meditating together, and of course making love, and all of this information just flooded into our heads and our beings, and we started to see how our lives, our paths came together and how they intersected. And we didn't so much understand the twin flame connection at that point, but that information started to unfold, of course, the more we were together. So from that day forward was when we started to build our body of work together. And my other career path as a graphic artist, which did lead me to follow technology through desktop publishing. When the internet came along, I was excited, but of course, I was now doing work for us. I wasn't doing work for clients. This enabled us to work in the home together, and so this is where things really started to accelerate for us. And even now, I've moved into the virtual reality worlds. I've been in there since 2020. Just during the COVID thing, I discovered the VR headsets, and actually through Burning Man, because Burning Man couldn't do it in the desert at that time, so they went virtual. And that's when I really we always wanted to be part of Burning Man, but we never could see ourselves getting there and what it was going to take to build and to construct. And that process was a bit overwhelming to us, and we didn't have a team behind us where we could do it. But when I got online and I started seeing how they were creating in virtual reality and actually on the computer as well, that opened up a whole new pocket of information. This opens up a lot of possibilities for me moving forward. I did start with building a lot of worlds surrounding the Temple of the Divine Muse in AltSpace, which is now closed down as a platform, but there are others that are available. And I've started building in VR chat and spatial, and want to expand into actually creating an app. And the app will be Muse, and then inside that app will be a lot of different locations and worlds and access points to not only learn more about our music, but a lot of the teachings from the DNA Avatar program will be in there as well. If you're not familiar with some of the VR worlds that we've built, we do have a video that featured a lot of the worlds that we built in AltSpace. I'll put the link below in the description so you can check that out. That'll at least give you an idea of, where we're heading and what we want to do. Those were the beginning steps. Okay, so let me get back on track here. It was a perfect combination of skills so that we could build our businesses while we were also fulfilling our spiritual mission work, and along with continually expanding our creativity in our relationship. And Gary was always teaching me more and more about sound. So in the beginning, I had the pretty rudimentary understanding of its possibilities at that time. So going back to the beginnings with Gary, and he started teaching me more about sound. He would let me listen to certain pieces of music, and he would educate me on, what was connecting and how deep the artist was actually connecting and how others were and some weren't, And then he would teach me about his work. And one of Gary's initial core beliefs, and remember going back to what I said about his time in the microscope, was that he believed that that our DNA could be affected by sound, and that if the right patterns and combinations of patterns and sounds were created, which he could now do, that a person listening could make those same connections. And that was the beginning of him understanding that he was here to build the frequency maps to these higher dimensional realms. And there were many of them. There wasn't just one location that he could navigate those pathways, whatever his intention was, and create the musical soundscapes, transmissions that would help others while they were listening. So he always felt from early on that he was communicating with the various levels of our DNA. And he knew that we didn't just have 2 strands of DNA. He knew that what then they were calling junk DNA was not junk, that it was DNA that people of a normal level didn't need to work on or connect with, but those of us who were seeking to connect to the higher spiritual realm, that we needed those DNA strands and the codes to come online so that we could then access this information. So the quantum levels, those of you who are touching into more of the terminology, some of these really cool science teachers who are coming through now that have the spiritual awareness, are spiritual scientists. And we called ourselves spiritual scientists as well, although we made a choice at some point where we didn't want to go into the science realm, that we thought it would be better for us to be as expansive as possible, forget about the science, although we enjoy it and entertain it and learn from it, that we would go on the real high-end spiritual levels because we could, because we chose that life together and we were supportive of each other's path no matter what that was going to be. We didn't do the normal, house, 2 cars, kids, and all that kind of stuff. We knew that children were not part of our pathway. So a lot of this knowledge is coming through in some of the new teachers today, and I hope that you're exploring them because they're bringing through a really nice balance and blend of the scientific and the spiritual. And it's coming through many aspects of our educational systems at this time. So back then, of course, it wasn't common knowledge and certainly not as acceptable as a form of truth. So for me, at this time, prior to meeting Gary, I was doing my deeper explorations using the meditative state and the shamanic state, because I loved not only just blissing out, but I liked navigating the realms and communicating with higher teachers. And so I did that early on and started to learn a lot about the DNA, because when I was working on people's bodies in Rolfing, it's a very slow, deep stroke, and the client has to go deep themselves with breath, with release, and so you're going right there with the client. I was traveling into their energy field, of course discovering past lives and energy patterns. It was at this time that I started seeing the chakra patterns in the auric field as well, but also knowing that I was communicating on a deep level, which I understood then to be the DNA. So you can see how we were both coming together with our own trainings through the years and gradually coming together with bringing our bodies of work together. Please continue on to part 3 of this intro to our Get Started Here playlist series. In part 3, I'll share more about our research years, creating our Odyssey Sound and Light healing space, and more about our catalog of music. I'll also share with you how you get started working with our music.